and the idea of how authors have treated the female vampire. I want to just stay in antiquity for 1 minute, and maybe we can use this as a bridge to get into more contemporary vampires. And it's this idea of Lilith. I heard you speaking about Lilith, and I found this really interesting. How it seems like she was retconned into being a vampire at some point in history. Can you talk a little bit about the history of Lilith, where she started, how she got to where she is now, in regards to how fiction authors treat her?
So again, Lilith, not a straightforward line, because we're basically in the region of Jewish folklore. And I'm not an expert on the religious part. Jewish folklore basically doesn't have a sort of, like the Christianity, this is the doctrine and this is the storyline, and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet sort of thing going on. It's more based on tradition and interpretation of texts that then are allowed to individually develop. And that gives you a bandwidth of stories about Lilith. What they all have in common is the starting point, whereas Lilith is the first wife to Adam, who was originally created before Adam, and that's quite interesting, but was created from dust and earth. Also interesting, because you immediately get to the sort of impure interpretation from the origin story there. And essentially, Lilith demands to be treated as an equal to Adam when Adam is created. And
heaven forbid, yeah.
Goes from the start, whatever gives you the idea that you're boss. I mean, you know, God is God, and that's fine. We can accept that, but we are both human, so this isn't happening. And Adam is having none of that, which means, or which leads to Lilith not having any of that. It's like, well, if you're not going to play ball, I'm not going to play ball. And she decides on her own accord to flee Eden. This obviously doesn't fit in anybody's plan. And from there, the stories just diverge immensely, and you have various interpretations where Lilith becomes a demon, or the first demon, and that leads into the later on the story of Lucifer and the devil and hell and all that. You have stories that make Lilith the first vampire, which is obviously where my research comes in. And you have stories where Lilith is a succubus, and you have, again, the dangerous sexually active woman who is a danger to young men, which is obviously in the patriarchal society's early days the main concern for everybody. Those are the three main strains that we go from. Like I said, there's millions of stories. I'm not going to attempt to summarize them all. If you look into that.
Yeah, let's just concentrate on how she became a vampire and how she's now treated by fiction writers.
Yeah, well, that's obviously where I come in. I think I did mention that in the talk you referenced earlier, that young Jewish women have started to reclaim Lilith as a feminist figurehead, which, as I've already mentioned, goes back to the origin story with the being created from dust and being impure, but from the start having her own head and being her own woman from the start, and not taking anybody's leadership just on the say-so, which has, I mean, by now, Lilith is a lot more around than it was at the time that when I wrote that paper. I will be honest, the development in literature, in fiction, has quite gotten away from me there. I think everybody has rediscovered Lilith at the same time and run with the idea of she is a danger and a danger in the beginning. And again, going back to the whole being a danger to women in pregnancy and childbirth, being a danger to the patriarchal society by the very virtue of endangering motherhood, and not seeing that as her calling in life at all. Where again, you have the quite easy link to the blood on account of both the killing. Lilith is made responsible basically for what we now call sudden infant death syndrome, which doesn't necessarily involve blood, but certainly involves death. And as I said, is obviously linked to childbirth and the early days of a newborn baby. So you have a very easy link to the blood. And that does make her a vampiric figure, initially going only after children. But again, from there, it is not a stretch for people, apparently. If a woman is dangerous, she must be beautiful because you need some attraction. Otherwise, it would be just too easy to say, well, that's not a good person. We want to get rid of her. We don't want to deal. And clearly, Lilith is still around and here to stay. So the explanation for that is that not just being a danger, she is also very beautiful. And that the vampire characteristics sort of grow out of that presumption, basically. And she becomes more and more dangerous by the virtue of being able to endanger more and more people. So she graduates from children to grown men. And
it seems like in fiction recently, she has been reclaimed almost as an anti-hero. She's gotten more powerful than she even was in years past. She's become like the queen vampire in a lot of fiction, in the way she's portrayed. Is that people reclaiming a monstrous icon and celebrating that monstrous icon, or is something else going on there?
I think there's multiple things going on. The reclaiming is certainly part of it. Part of it is also you need an explanation for why this bad, dangerous character is still around. And the explanations vary from her just being super duper powerful, in which case we can't be blamed. We can't be blamed for being attracted to something that's really powerful, because basically we're not in control of our own will. And that's how you get the super powerful Lilith figure in fiction cropping up. The other explanation could just be that she's otherwise attractive, which is also being used, but it's not quite as powerful as just making her powerful and giving her that power from the onset. That's a much better explanation as to why we put up with a dangerous entity.